At some point, frustration stops being dramatic and starts being honest. And for Cleveland, that moment finally arrived. The word pathetic wasn't thrown around lightly. It wasn't clickbait. It was the sound of years of excuses collapsing all at once. Bad play calling, confused leadership, coaches buried in play sheets instead of actually coaching the game. What spilled out wasn't just anger about one loss. It was exhaustion with an entire process that never seems to change. 3 wins, 12 losses, another season circling the drain. And yet somehow, the conversation still keeps landing in the same place: the quarterback. That's what makes this moment different. Because when you strip away the yelling and the sarcasm, a much more uncomfortable truth shows up. This team just went up against one of the AFC's most complete rosters while fielding rookies everywhere, including behind an offensive line missing every single original starter. Not one. 0. And instead of talking about that reality, the blame immediately went hunting for a new target. Again, that's where things start to feel dishonest. Because this isn't just about one game, it's about a pattern. Quarterbacks come in with promise and leave looking broken. Veterans suddenly forget how to play. Rookies are judged like finished products before they've even had time to breathe. And the system never seems to take responsibility. That's why this rant hit a nerve. Not because it was loud, but because it said the quiet part out loud. That the Cleveland Browns aren't failing because they lack talent. They're failing because the environment keeps setting people up to lose. And once you start looking at the numbers, the coaching decisions, and the history stacked behind them, it becomes impossible to unsee what's really going on. Because this mess didn't start this season. It's been building for years. Here, what somehow got lost in the noise after that game, and it shouldn't have. The Cleveland Browns didn't just lose to some average opponent. They lined up against the Buffalo Bills, a roster packed with playoff-tested veterans, a team that's been living in January football for years. That matters, or at least it should. Now compare the situations. Buffalo walked in with stability, continuity, and an identity that's been built and reinforced season after season. Cleveland walked in with rookies everywhere, including at quarterback, and an offensive line that didn't have a single original starter available. Not one. That's not an exaggeration. That's the reality they were working with. But listen to the post-game conversation, and you'd never know it. No one paused to say, "Hold on, this was a mismatch on paper." No one asked how any quarterback, let alone a rookie, is supposed to operate behind protection made up of backups playing out of position. Instead, the analysis jumped straight to disappointment, to blame, to declarations about who isn't the guy. That's the part that should bother you. Because context doesn't excuse bad football, but it explains it. And Cleveland fans have been trained to ignore context because it's easier to believe the fix is simple. Just swap the quarterback. Just draft the next one. Just reset and try again. That mindset is how this cycle survives. What made this game especially frustrating wasn't that the Browns lost. It was that they competed. They fought. They stayed in it longer than many expected, despite the talent gap and the injuries. And instead of acknowledging that effort, the reaction went straight to outrage. That's not analysis, that's emotional whiplash. And here, where it gets dangerous. When every loss is treated as proof that the quarterback failed, the organization never has to answer harder questions. Questions about preparation, about game planning, about whether the system itself is capable of supporting development. It becomes easier to pretend the problem is individual, not structural. That's why this game matters more than the final score. It exposed how quickly perspective disappears in Cleveland, how fast patience turns into panic, and how a rookie like Shedeur Sanders gets evaluated as if he's supposed to overcome conditions that would cripple most veterans. And once you accept that context was ignored here, the next question becomes unavoidable. if the situation was stacked against him from the start? Why are the expectations acting like it was? This is where the criticism starts to fall apart. If you actually look at how that game was coached, it becomes clear that the performance everyone's upset about didn't happen by accident. It was engineered. The entire week leading up to kickoff, the message was simple: get the ball out faster. Don't hold it. Don't wait for routes to develop. Don't trust protection that doesn't exist. So that's exactly what happened. Shedeur Sanders recorded his fastest time to throw all season, around 2.7 seconds. On paper, that sounds like improvement. In reality, it was survival mode. Quick checkdowns, safe throws, no rhythm, no opportunity to let plays breathe. And predictably, it looked ugly. But here's the part nobody wants to say out loud. When you coach a quarterback to play scared, the offense will look scared. You can't strip a young QB of creativity, limit his reads, rush every decision, and then act surprised when the result feels lifeless. That's not execution failure, that's design failure. This was Shedeur suddenly forgetting how to play football. This was him doing exactly what he was told. Get rid of the ball, avoid mistakes, live to see the next down. And when you reduce a quarterback's job to that, you remove the very things that make him effective in the first place. What's worse is that this approach didn't just hurt him, it helped the defense. Buffalo didn't have to respect the deep field. They didn't have to hesitate. They could sit on routes, close space, and force Cleveland to grind out yards that weren't there. That's not how you develop anyone. And the most alarming part, this isn't new. We've seen this exact script play out before. Different quarterbacks, same system, same fear-based philosophy. Protect the ball at all costs, even if it means sacrificing growth. Don't lose the game instead of trying to win it. That mindset might keep scores close for a while, but it doesn't build confidence. It doesn't create rhythm, and it definitely doesn't help a rookie learn how to command an NFL offense. So when fans say he looked worse, they're not wrong. What they're missing is why. He didn't regress because the moment was too big. He regressed because the leash was too tight, because the coaching staff prioritized avoiding embarrassment over allowing development. And when that happens, the quarterback becomes the face of a failure that started long before the ball was snapped. And once you see that, the next realization hits even harder. Because this wasn't an isolated mistake. It was part of a much larger pattern. Once you step back, this stops being about one game entirely. Because what happened to Shedeur Sanders didn't come out of nowhere. It fits a pattern Cleveland fans know all too well, even if they don't always want to admit it. Different quarterbacks, different expectations, same ending. Think about it. Veterans come in and suddenly look washed. Young players arrive with upside and leave looking unsure. Confidence fades. Decision-making slows. The offense feels tighter, smaller, more restricted every week. And the excuse is always the same. The quarterback just couldn't execute. But when that happens over and over again, at some point it stops being coincidence. Joe Flacco is a perfect example. A Super Bowl winner. A veteran who's seen every defense imaginable. In this system, he looked hesitant, out of sync, and ineffective. Then he leaves, lands elsewhere, and suddenly looks functional again. That alone should raise alarms. Go back further. Baker Mayfield arrived with swagger and confidence. For a brief moment, it looked like Cleveland had finally turned a corner. Then the offense tightened. The margin for error shrank. Risk-taking disappeared. And slowly, that same hesitation crept in. He didn't forget how to play football. He was coached into a version of himself that didn't work. Even younger quarterbacks haven't been spared. Dylan Gabriel showed flashes, then was reined in, told to protect the ball, told to avoid mistakes, told in subtle ways not to trust what he was seeing. The result? A quarterback afraid to pull the trigger. Now Shedeur is in that same chair. And that's where the uncomfortable conclusion forms. This isn't about talent evaluation. It's about development philosophy, about an offensive system that prioritizes control over creativity, safety over growth. And when that approach fails, the quarterback absorbs all the blame. The common denominator isn't age, it isn't experience, it isn't arm strength or athleticism. It's the system. And that system flows from the top, from the head coach and play caller, from the philosophy that says, don't lose the game, instead of, go win it. That mindset might survive for a while when everything else is perfect. But when injuries pile up and rookies are forced into action, it collapses. That's what you're seeing now. And once that realization sets in, it becomes harder to accept the easy narrative that the quarterback is the problem. Because if every quarterback struggles the same way, under the same conditions, the answer is staring everyone in the face. And it leads directly to a much darker question. What happened to the coach who once looked like he had all the answers? This is where the conversation gets uncomfortable, because the numbers don't lie. At one point, Kevin Stefanski was viewed as the steady hand, the adult in the room, a coach who brought structure to chaos and made Cleveland feel functional for the first time in years. Early on, the results backed it up. Winning seasons, playoff relevance, a sense that the Browns were finally moving forward instead of sideways. Then something snapped. Over his first 4 seasons, Stefanski won at a respectable pace. Not elite, but stable, competitive, the kind of trajectory you build on. But over the last 2 seasons, that winning rate didn't just dip, it fell off a cliff. A collapse so steep it's almost unheard of in modern NFL history. This isn't bad luck. This isn't injuries alone. This is regression at a scale that forces bigger questions. Because when a coach goes from competence to dysfunction this quickly, something fundamental has changed. The play calling feels tighter. The offense feels afraid. Creativity has been replaced with caution, and adaptability has been replaced with rigid structure. Instead of adjusting to personnel, the system demands that players adjust to it and punishes them when they can't. That's where development dies. What makes this especially damaging is that Stefanski isn't just the head coach. He's also deeply involved in the offense, which means when things break, there's no buffer, no counterbalance, no alternate voice in the room pushing a different approach. Everything flows from one philosophy. And when that philosophy stops working, the fallout hits everyone, especially quarterbacks. They're the most visible piece, the easiest target, the fastest way to deflect from deeper issues. So when people ask why a rookie like Shedeur looks overwhelmed at times, or why veterans suddenly look hesitant, the answer might not be complexity. It might be constraint. Because a system designed to avoid mistakes eventually avoids progress. It teaches quarterbacks to play not to fail instead of playing to succeed. And over time, that erodes confidence, timing, and trust. That's how you end up with offenses that feel stuck in neutral, not explosive enough to scare defenses, not flexible enough to adapt when things go wrong. And when that happens, no quarterback, rookie or veteran, stands a real chance. Which brings us to the most frustrating part of all. Despite all of this, the blame keeps flowing in one direction, straight toward the youngest player in the room. And that raises a question Cleveland can't keep dodging forever. If the coach is collapsing, why is the quarterback paying the price? This is where the criticism crosses the line from unfair to reckless. Shedeur Sanders has played 5 games. 5. That's it. And in those 5 games, he's been asked to operate behind a patchwork offensive line, throw to inexperienced receivers still fighting for roster spots, and execute an offense that's been shrinking instead of evolving. Yet somehow, the expectation is immediate clarity. He's being judged like a finished product instead of what he actually is, a rookie thrown into the fire at the worst possible time, late in a lost season, against elite defenses, with no runway to grow and no margin for error. That's not development, that's exposure. And Cleveland has done this before. When things go wrong, the quarterback becomes the shortcut explanation. It's easier to say, "He's not it," than to confront systemic failure. It's easier to restart the cycle than to fix the foundation. So the pressure gets dumped on the youngest, least powerful person in the room. That's exactly what's happening here. Shedeur isn't being evaluated in a vacuum. He's being compared to impossible standards, to legends in their prime, to imaginary versions of quarterbacks who don't exist. And when he inevitably falls short of those fantasies, the verdict is rushed and harsh. But look at the conditions. No protection, limited play design, coaching that prioritizes avoiding mistakes over learning from them. That's not a recipe for success, it's a trap. And once a quarterback starts playing tight, everything slows down. Reads take longer, confidence erodes. Small mistakes get magnified. That's how careers get derailed. What's wild is that Cleveland fans know this pattern better than anyone. This franchise has cycled through dozens of quarterbacks over the past 2 decades. Different styles, different pedigrees, same outcome. At some point, logic demands a pause. If every quarterback fails here, what are the odds they're all the problem? The truth is uncomfortable, but it's unavoidable. Shedeur isn't being given a fair evaluation window. He's being used as a pressure valve for an organization that doesn't want to admit how broken the infrastructure really is. And until that changes, it won't matter who lines up under center. The name will change. The result won't. Which leads to the realization Cleveland keeps trying to outrun. This isn't a quarterback problem. It's an environment problem. Once you zoom out far enough, this stops being emotional and starts being undeniable. Cleveland has become a place where quarterbacks go to disappear. Not because they're all bad, not because every draft pick was a mistake, but because the environment has never stayed functional long enough for anyone to fully develop. Systems change, philosophies flip, coaches come and go, and the quarterback is always the one left holding the blame when the reset button gets slammed. Think about how often this has happened. A new quarterback arrives with hope attached to his name. There's excitement. There's talk about finally turning the corner. And then adversity hits. Injuries, bad play calling, roster gaps. Instead of adjusting around the quarterback, the organization tightens up. Playbooks shrink. Risks vanish. The offense becomes predictable and lifeless. Then comes the verdict. Not the right guy. Next, that cycle has repeated so many times that it's warped expectations. Fans don't even realize how abnormal it is anymore. 5 games is suddenly enough. A bad month becomes a career obituary. Development is treated like a luxury instead of a requirement. And here's the quiet truth. Other franchises don't operate like this. Teams that actually develop quarterbacks expect early mistakes. They tolerate ugly stretches. They build infrastructure first and patience second. Cleveland has done the opposite for years, demanding instant results while providing unstable conditions. That's how you end up with a quarterback graveyard. It's also why comparisons feel so unfair. When people ask why a young QB doesn't look confident, they ignore what confidence needs to exist. Protection, continuity, trust from the staff. None of those things appear consistently in Cleveland. So when Shedeur struggles, the reaction isn't curiosity, it's déjà vu. Another name added to the list. Another disappointment filed away. Another excuse not to confront the bigger issue. But here's the part that should worry everyone. If the Browns keep responding to adversity by starting over at quarterback, they'll never fix the real problem. Because the real problem doesn't line up under center. It sits in meeting rooms, in philosophies, in decision-making chains that never seem to change even when results keep getting worse. That's why this moment feels so heavy. Not because one rookie is struggling, but because Cleveland is once again standing at the edge of the same cliff. And the most dangerous thing they can do right now is convince themselves that jumping will finally lead somewhere different. Just when it felt like things couldn't get more unstable, the leaks started. According to reports shared by Ian Rappaport, there's still no clear decision on the future of Kevin Stefanski. Let that sink in. A season that's already slipped away, a record that speaks for itself. And yet, uncertainty still hangs over the most important position in the building. That alone is a problem. But what really turned heads was who's expected to have major influence over that decision. Reports suggest that Andrew Barry will play a central role in determining the direction of the franchise moving forward. And that's where the conversation gets uncomfortable. Because this isn't about rumors of firings or secret power plays. It's about accountability. Barry's track record is mixed at best. Receiver depth has been an ongoing issue. Offensive line stability has evaporated. Quarterback solutions have come and gone with no long-term answer. And now, the same leadership group responsible for those outcomes is being trusted to fix them, again. That's not a reset, that's recycling. To be clear, none of this means decisions won't be made. But the fact that they haven't been made yet tells you everything about the internal confusion. Organizations with clarity don't hesitate like this. They know what they are and where they're going. Cleveland still feels stuck between past beliefs and present reality. And that uncertainty trickles down. It affects coaching. It affects game planning. It affects how aggressively players are developed or protected. When leadership doesn't commit to a direction, everyone below them plays cautiously. Coaches avoid risks. Players feel the tension. Development stalls. That's the invisible damage leaks like this do. And it's especially harmful for a rookie quarterback. Because when the people shaping the future don't know what that future looks like, the evaluation process becomes warped. Short-term results get overvalued. Context disappears. Pressure intensifies. That's how you end up judging survival football as failure. None of this is being presented as fact beyond what's been reported. These are reported dynamics, not conclusions. But even as speculation, they explain a lot about what we're seeing on the field. This isn't just dysfunction, it's indecision. And indecision is the one thing a rebuilding team cannot afford. Because while Cleveland debates, delays, and deflects, the season keeps moving forward. Reputations get shaped, narratives harden, and young players like Shedeur get labeled long before the organization ever figures itself out. Which brings us to the most dangerous belief of all, the one that keeps this cycle alive. The idea that the solution is simple. Just draft someone new. This is the lie that keeps everything broken. The belief that all of this can be fixed by simply drafting another quarterback. It sounds comforting. It sounds clean. It gives fans something to hope for every April. A new name, a new jersey, a fresh start. But history has been screaming the same message for years, and Cleveland keeps refusing to hear it. Quarterbacks don't fail in isolation. They fail when they're dropped into unstable systems and asked to save everything at once. Every offseason, the conversation resets. This guy will be different. This one fits the system. This is finally the answer. And every time the infrastructure stays the same, the offensive philosophy doesn't adapt. The development plan remains unclear. The margin for error stays microscopic. Then the cycle repeats. People love pointing to success stories like Josh Allen as proof that talent solves everything. But that comparison ignores the most important part of the story. Allen didn't walk into a rigid system that demanded perfection. The Buffalo Bills built around him. They let him make mistakes. They leaned into what he did well instead of punishing what he didn't. That's development. Cleveland does the opposite. They draft quarterbacks and immediately try to mold them into something safe, something controlled, something that won't embarrass the coaching staff. And when that approach inevitably fails, the quarterback takes the fall. Not the scheme, not the philosophy, not the decision makers, just the player. That's why the idea of just draft another guy is so dangerous. It allows the organization to avoid real accountability. It delays the hard work of fixing the foundation, and it guarantees that whoever comes next will be judged before they ever have a real chance. Shedeur Sanders doesn't need to be crowned the future right now. That's not the argument. The argument is far simpler and far more important. He needs a real evaluation, one that comes with protection, with coherent play calling, with patience, with a system designed to grow instead of restrict. Because until Cleveland proves it can provide those things, no quarterback will succeed here long-term. Not a rookie, not a veteran, not a can't-miss prospect. The Browns don't have a quarterback problem. They have a shortcut problem. And shortcuts are exactly how you stay stuck in the same place for decades. Which leaves Cleveland at a crossroads they've seen before, but never handled correctly. Fix the environment, or sacrifice another quarterback to the same old cycle. This is the moment where everything slows down. Not on the field, but inside the organization. Because what's happening right now isn't confusing anymore. It's clear. The Cleveland Browns aren't standing at the edge of a rebuild. They're standing at the edge of self-awareness, and that's a much harder place to be. The easy move is obvious. Blame the quarterback, reset the clock, convince everyone that the next draft pick will finally be the one who breaks the curse. That move is familiar, comfortable, and completely ineffective. The harder move is rarer. It requires admitting that the system has failed more players than the players have failed the system. It requires acknowledging that coaching philosophy matters as much as talent. That development isn't linear. That stability isn't optional. And that panic has quietly become Cleveland's default setting. Shedeur Sanders doesn't need to be crowned anything right now. He doesn't need blind loyalty or premature anointing. What he needs is something far more basic and far more difficult for this franchise to provide. A fair chance. That means protection that isn't improvised week to week, play calling that adapts instead of constrains, a coaching staff confident enough to let a young quarterback learn through mistakes instead of fearing them, and leadership willing to commit to a direction instead of hovering in permanent evaluation mode. If Cleveland does that, then the answers will come naturally. Either the quarterback grows into the role or he doesn't, but at least the verdict will mean something. If they do, then nothing changes. Another name will get added to the list. Another season will end with the same arguments. Another fan base will be told to be patient, while the organization does the exact opposite. And the Browns will once again wonder why success feels so close and yet never arrives. This offseason will be framed as a turning point. It always is, but turning points only matter if you actually turn. The Browns can choose to fix the environment instead of replacing the face. They can choose development over desperation, accountability over shortcuts, growth over fear. Or they can do what they've always done. And if history is any guide, the scariest part isn't that Cleveland might make the wrong choice. It's that they'll convince themselves they've made the right one, right before the cycle starts all over again.